city settles in for the night, and science tiptoes softly through the vast mysteries of existence. Tonight, we'll wander together into perhaps the most intimate mystery of all, consciousness. That quiet, steady hum behind your thoughts, the silent observer of your every moment, the part of you that knows you are you. Why are we aware? Why does the world bloom into color, sound, and feeling inside our minds instead of remaining a silent mechanical play of atoms? Even now, as you listen, a small part of you notices your breath, the softness of your pillow, the faint glow of the screen, or the shadows in your room. Strange, isn't it, that you're not just hearing these words but aware that you're hearing them? Before we drift any further into this quiet ocean of thought, I'd love to know, where are you tonight? And what time is it, right now, in your little corner of the world? If you find this gentle journey soothing, or simply a welcome companion to ease you into rest, I would be ever so grateful if you'd like the video, perhaps subscribe, and share this small sanctuary of calm with others who might need it. Now settle in, let your thoughts loosen like threads in warm water, and let's begin, because somewhere between dreams and daylight, between neurons and stars, lies the curious story of awareness. Have you ever paused just for a moment and marveled at the simple fact that you are here? Not just breathing, not just existing, but noticing, feeling, experiencing. Right now, you aren't just hearing my voice, you're aware that you're hearing it. It's a quiet, constant miracle, really. The warm awareness that you are you, nestled inside your own mind like a candle burning gently in a dark room. Awareness doesn't shout, it hums, and yet, for something so familiar, so intimately ours, it remains in many ways one of the strangest and most elusive phenomena in the universe. Why do we experience anything at all? Because when you think about it, there's no reason that your brain, this intricate web of neurons and chemistry, had to feel like anything. A rock doesn't sit under the sun feeling warm. A clock doesn't know it's ticking. Even complex machines, calculators, phones, computers, perform staggering feats of processing, and yet there's no little voice inside saying, "Ah, yes, here I am, calculating." But you're not just reacting, you're noticing your reactions. You have a front row seat to the theatre of your own existence, and within this strange theatre, awareness plays its quiet games. Sometimes consciousness feels rich and vibrant. A moment of joy with friends seems to glow, like a photograph etched in memory. The scent of rain, the warmth of tea in your hands, the hush of snowfall outside your window, all woven together into one beautiful, unified moment of being. At other times, awareness slips quietly into the background, as though politely giving you space. Hours vanish while you're absorbed in a book, a hobby, or the comfort of soft conversation. You're fully immersed, yet barely aware of the clock's steady march. Only later do you notice how quickly time dissolved. And then there are moments when awareness wobbles strangely, when you jolt awake from a dream, unsure for a few seconds where you are, or when your mind wanders so far that you suddenly return to the present, blinking as if surfacing from some invisible fog. Have you ever driven somewhere and suddenly realized you don't remember part of the journey? The road slipped past, your hands steered, but you were somewhere else entirely. Not unconscious, but not fully present either. This odd halfway place is sometimes called automaticity, when your body performs without conscious oversight, freeing your mind to wander, like being both here and elsewhere at once. Awareness, it seems, has different flavors. There's the sharp, heightened awareness of fear, where everything feels brighter, louder, more urgent. Your heart races, your senses sharpen, time itself seems to slow as your brain floods your system with stress signals preparing for action. And then there's the dreamlike quality of drowsiness, where thoughts blur and the boundary between real and imagined becomes wonderfully soft. You feel yourself drifting, as though your mind is loosening its grip on the world. Between these poles exist a whole spectrum of conscious states: alert, distracted, immersed, drowsy, entranced. And remarkably, even in states where our awareness fades, in deep sleep for instance, the machinery of the brain never truly stops. Neurons continue their silent conversations. Memories consolidate. The body repairs. And then, as dawn peeks through the curtains, awareness gently reawakens, as though it had simply paused for a moment to rest. There's also something curiously self-referential about awareness. You don't just see, you know you're seeing. You don't just feel happy or sad, you notice yourself feeling happy or sad. It's as though awareness casts a second light on experience, a small internal narrator quietly saying, "This is happening now." This recursive quality is sometimes called meta-consciousness, awareness of awareness itself, a strange loop endlessly folding back on itself. This ability allows us to reflect, to plan, to ponder who we are and who we wish to be. It gives us identity, memory, hope, regret, and imagination. Without it, life would still unfold, sights seen, words spoken, but there would be no one watching the show, just reactions, not reflections. And yet, for all its intimacy, awareness is surprisingly fragile. Under anesthesia, it can vanish almost entirely, slipping away like a light being switched off. The machinery of the brain remains active, but the stage lights dim. In coma patients, awareness may be deeply altered or absent, existing somewhere behind the veil. In moments of deep meditation, awareness may expand or dissolve, as practitioners describe a state where the sense of self softens or even disappears entirely, leaving only pure experience without an eye to observe it. And in certain rare conditions like locked-in syndrome, consciousness remains fully intact, trapped within a body that can no longer move or speak, leaving the person to experience awareness silently, internally, while the world moves around them. It reminds us how delicately this flame of consciousness burns, resilient yet vulnerable. Curiously, even when we sleep, awareness doesn't fully disappear. Dreams offer a surreal playground where consciousness continues in altered form. In dreams, we accept the impossible. Talking animals, shifting landscapes, impossible physics, without question. And yet, even as the dream unfolds, a part of us remains present, experiencing the world inside our sleeping minds. Occasionally in lucid dreams, we become aware within the dream, realizing we are dreaming, and even exerting some control over the unfolding story. It suggests that consciousness, far from being binary, exists on a fluid continuum, shifting in depth, clarity, and control. Emotion too plays its games with awareness. Think of falling in love. How colors seem brighter, music more meaningful, days more vibrant. Your entire perceptual world is infused with feeling. Or grief, where the world may seem muted, slowed, heavy with meaning. Even boredom shapes our perception of experience. A dull lecture or a long queue stretches time endlessly, while a joyful afternoon evaporates before we can properly hold on to it. In each case, the external world remains the same. It is our internal awareness that bends, colors, and reshapes how that world is felt. And then there's the mystery of attention. You are bombarded every second by sensations. The weight of your body on the bed, the sound of distant traffic, the smell of rain, the faint hum of electronics. Yet your conscious awareness selects only a tiny sliver of this information to focus on. Psychologists sometimes compare this to a spotlight shining on a dark stage, illuminating one small part of experience, while the rest remains in shadow. This attentional spotlight can be deliberate, focusing on reading, conversation, or a problem to solve, or it can be hijacked by sudden sounds, emotions, or thoughts that leap unexpectedly into awareness. Attention and awareness dance together, shaping your experience moment by moment. Perhaps one of the most curious facts of consciousness is how invisible it can be when everything functions smoothly. You rarely pause to think, "Ah, yes, I'm aware right now." Instead, you're simply in it, immersed in life, acting, speaking, thinking, without constantly noticing the fact that you're doing so. It's often only when something interrupts, a strange dream, an unexpected emotion, a philosophical conversation, that we step back and notice the quiet miracle of awareness humming beneath every moment. Even children experience consciousness differently than adults. For very young children, the boundary between self and world may feel thinner. Infants live in a mostly sensory world, colors, sounds, textures, before language and identity fully take shape. As children grow, they begin to construct a sense of self, understanding their place in time, developing memories, and reflecting on themselves as individuals. Yet even then, their awareness remains wonderfully present-focused, living in the now with a vibrancy many adults struggle to reclaim. And finally, consciousness is the quiet stage upon which every one of your memories, hopes, fears, and loves are performed. Without awareness, there would be no joy in a sunrise, no sadness in goodbye, no wonder at the stars. It allows you to savor the sweetness of fruit, to hear the laughter of a friend, to marvel at distant galaxies and tiny insects alike. Consciousness is, in many ways, the great canvas of our lives, the invisible space where everything we cherish takes form. Even now, as you listen in the hush of your room, that small flame of awareness burns gently, steady, curious, quietly watching. Long before the bright lights of modern neuroscience began to blink and hum, long before laboratories whispered their quiet secrets into microscopes and scanners, people all around the world gazed inward and wondered, what is this thing inside me? This peculiar sense of being, this quiet watcher behind my eyes, this meanness that makes me, well, me. And so, long before science tried to define consciousness, stories tried to cradle it. In many ancient traditions, consciousness was not something hidden inside the brain. It was something gifted, something breathed into the body by forces far beyond human understanding. In ancient Egypt, for example, the self wasn't a single thing, but rather a gathering of many parts, each contributing to a person's existence. There was the ka, the vital life force, the ba, often translated as the soul, which could travel between the realms of the living and the dead, and the ak, the immortal aspect that would continue beyond death. For the Egyptians, consciousness did not simply vanish after life ended. It transformed, wandered, and waited. Their tombs were carefully stocked with the items one might need for this journey: food, treasures, even little models of servants, as though consciousness required luggage for whatever came next. Far away in the Indian subcontinent, philosophers were tracing their own paths through the forest of awareness. In the Vedic texts and later in Hindu philosophy, consciousness was often described through the lens of Atman, the eternal self, and its connection to Brahman, the universal essence of all that exists. The individual mind, in this view, was not truly separate but a reflection of the greater cosmic consciousness. Like waves rising and falling on the ocean's surface, each person's awareness was a temporary form, but underneath, there was only the vast, endless sea. The Buddhist traditions offered yet another subtle melody, that the self is not fixed, not eternal, but constantly shifting, changing, dissolving. Consciousness was not a solid gem hidden in the skull, but a river of experiences, thoughts, sensations, emotions, arising and passing like clouds in the sky. Clinging to the idea of a permanent self, Buddhism taught, was the root of suffering. Freedom came from recognizing the illusion. Even today, when one sits quietly in meditation, simply observing thoughts as they come and go, one is engaging with these very old ideas. stepping into that quiet current where consciousness shows its flickering, ever-changing face. In many indigenous cultures, the boundaries of consciousness extended far beyond human skin. Among the Ojibwe people of North America, and in many animistic traditions worldwide, rivers, trees, mountains, and animals were not simply objects or resources. They were seen as beings with their own forms of awareness. The world in this view was alive with many kinds of consciousness, some familiar, some utterly foreign. The whisper of wind through trees, the turning of the seasons, the gaze of an animal, each might contain its own kind of knowing. This perspective did not separate humans from nature, but wove them into a vast, breathing network of life. We were not the sole holders of consciousness, but merely one of its many expressions. In Greek philosophy, the pondering took a different turn. Plato imagined a world of perfect, eternal forms, abstract ideals that existed beyond the physical realm. Our consciousness in this picture was like a prisoner in a cave, watching shadows on the wall, glimpses of the true reality that lay beyond sensory experience. Plato believed that knowledge was, in fact, a kind of remembering, that the soul, before birth, had glimpsed the world of forms, and that learning was the slow process of recalling those perfect truths. Consciousness, then, was not so much created as it was awakened. And then there was Aristotle, more grounded, more methodical. For him, consciousness and the soul were not separate from the body, but deeply entwined with it, the animating principle that gave life to matter, like the shape of a statue emerging from marble. In Aristotle's view, a living being was not merely material, but organized material, and the soul was the form of that organization, the pattern that made life possible. Consciousness was an active process, bound to the structures of living systems. Centuries later, in medieval Europe, Christian theologians saw consciousness as inseparable from the divine spark given by God. The soul was immortal, unique, and sacred, destined to be judged and to live eternally in heaven or hell. For many, consciousness was not something to be explained. It was something to be safeguarded, disciplined, and ultimately redeemed. Mystics like Teresa of Avila and John of the Cross described states of heightened awareness, where the soul became flooded with divine presence, a form of consciousness so expansive and radiant that ordinary language could barely touch it. In the Islamic world, philosophers like Avicenna, Ibn Sina, explored consciousness with striking sophistication for their time. Avicenna proposed his famous floating man thought experiment. Imagine a person suddenly created, suspended in empty space, cut off from all sensation. No sight, no sound, no touch. Despite lacking any contact with the external world, Avicenna argued, this person would still be aware of their own existence. I am, they would know, even in total darkness. Here was the seed of self-awareness, detached from the senses, an early glimmer of the problem that modern philosophers would later call the hard problem of consciousness. In ancient China, Taoist and Confucian perspectives offered their own subtle colors to the tapestry. Taoism, with its fluid metaphors of water, wind, and flow, suggested that consciousness might best be understood not as a fixed thing, but as a process of harmony, a balance between self and world, effort and surrender. The Tao, or way, was the path along which all things moved, and true awareness came not from grasping or analyzing, but from aligning oneself with this natural unfolding. Across the Pacific, in Polynesian traditions, the self was deeply connected to mana, a spiritual force that infused all beings. Consciousness was not merely a private, individual phenomenon, but something inherited, shared, and interwoven with ancestors, nature, and community. Even the words we use today to describe consciousness carry echoes of these ancient ideas. We speak of awakening, as though awareness is something that can open like a flower. We speak of enlightenment, as though knowledge illuminates a once darkened mind. We say someone has lost consciousness, as though it can be misplaced like a dropped coin. We talk about higher states of consciousness as though awareness has altitudes and one can ascend through layers of perception. And yet, for all these metaphors and models, a simple question remained. Where exactly does consciousness live? In the heart? In the breath? In the blood? Ancient medical traditions often saw the heart as the seat of awareness. Even today, we speak poetically of the heart's desires and knowing in our hearts. It wasn't until centuries later that attention shifted decisively to the brain, that wrinkled, mysterious mass hidden inside our skulls, pulsing silently with electric life. The scientific revolution of the 17th and 18th centuries brought a sharp new lens to the question. René Descartes, in his famous Cogito ergo sum, I think therefore I am, planted consciousness at the very core of existence. His dualism proposed that mind and matter were distinct substances, the thinking soul and the extended body. But how could these two separate realms interact? Descartes imagined a tiny structure deep in the brain as the pineal gland, as the possible meeting place between mind and body. Today we know that the pineal gland regulates sleep cycles rather than housing the soul. But Descartes' puzzle still echoes. How does subjective experience emerge from physical matter? Later philosophers like John Locke and David Hume would probe the idea of selfhood even further. For Locke, personal identity was rooted in continuity of memory. A self was the same self if it could remember its past experiences. Hume, ever skeptical, argued that the self was not a solid thing at all, just a bundle of perceptions endlessly shifting. Look inward, he said, and you will not find a fixed self, only a stream of sensations. As centuries passed, the language shifted from souls to minds, from spirits to neurons, from divine gifts to biological processes. But the mystery of consciousness remained like a quiet ember, glowing softly beneath every explanation. Even today, across modern cultures, we wrestle with consciousness through stories, art, and metaphor. In literature, the unreliable narrator, aware, but perhaps mistaken, plays with the fragile nature of perception. In cinema, films like Inception and The Matrix ask, what is real? Is this all a dream within a dream? In spiritual practices, seekers chase altered states of consciousness, moments where the boundaries of self seem to blur or vanish. Across languages, we still frame consciousness through poetry. I feel alive. I lost myself in the moment. I was beside myself with joy. From ancient temples to modern laboratories, from whispered prayers to fMRI scanners, humanity continues its quiet dialogue with awareness. The flame inside us burns on, warm, flickering, endlessly curious. We may not yet know exactly what it is or how it came to be, but still, we sit beside it, night after night, listening to its gentle hum. And so we arrive, gently, at the doorstep of modern science, that great patient listener which stares into the swirling mysteries of existence and quietly asks, how? How does this strange flame of consciousness emerge? What stirs the embers into thought, sensation, awareness? How does a soft web of neurons bathed in chemicals and electricity give rise to the feeling of being? If ancient myths sang of souls and divine sparks, today's scientists turn their gaze inward, into the brain itself, hoping to map its silent symphony. Inside your skull, floating quietly in its dark, fluid world, lies about 1.4 kilograms of tissue, the human brain. Roughly the size of a small cauliflower, though considerably less tasty, it consists of roughly 86 billion neurons, each reaching out like tiny trees, their branches weaving together into an unimaginable forest. These neurons communicate with each other through brief electrical pulses, tiny flashes of activity called action potentials. When one neuron fires, its signal travels down its slender axon, triggering the release of chemicals, neurotransmitters, that leap across microscopic gaps known as synapses. It is in these countless exchanges happening billions of times every second that thought arises. But thought alone is not consciousness. Computers, after all, process information. They calculate, recognize patterns, even respond to questions. And yet, there is no little voice inside your phone softly whispering, "Ah, yes, I am here." What transforms simple processing into subjective experience? Why does your brain not merely calculate but feel? Here, modern neuroscience faces what philosophers have called the hard problem of consciousness. Not just how the brain processes information, but why it feels like anything to be processing it at all. Scientists have made impressive strides in mapping what parts of the brain do. We can now watch, through the soft glow of fMRI machines and the rhythmic lines of EEG scans, as different regions light up during thought, emotion, sensation. We know, for instance, that the thalamus acts as a central hub, routing sensory information like a switchboard operator, directing signals from your eyes, ears, skin, and organs to the appropriate regions of the cortex. The cerebral cortex, a wrinkled sheet of tissue folded like a crumpled map, hosts many of the brain's higher functions. Different lobes handle vision, movement, memory, decision-making. But while these regions perform specialized tasks, consciousness seems to emerge not from any one location, but from their integration. The way information from countless sources converges and blends into a unified whole. This brings us to one of the leading models in the modern study of consciousness, the Global Workspace Theory, or GWT. The Global Workspace Theory paints consciousness as a kind of mental stage. Picture a dark theatre. Around the edges sit countless unconscious systems, vision, hearing, memory, language, emotions, all quietly processing their own information behind the scenes. Every so often something grabs attention, a loud sound, a sudden thought, a pressing emotion. That information is then projected onto the brightly lit stage, the global workspace, where multiple systems can access, share, and coordinate around it. When information reaches the stage, it enters conscious awareness. You don't just see the cup of tea, or you know that you see it. You don't just feel the emotion, you recognize and reflect upon it. In this model, consciousness is not everything the brain does. It's what happens when certain information becomes globally available, like a memo circulated to the entire office, rather than kept in one department. But not everyone agrees that the brain works like a theatre. Another prominent model, one that peers even deeper into the mystery, is the Integrated Information Theory, or IIT. Unlike GWT, which focuses on information being shared across systems, IIT suggests that consciousness arises from how integrated and unified information is within a system. Imagine many parts of the brain talking to one another, not as isolated specialists, but as deeply interconnected partners. In IIT, consciousness isn't about where the information comes from, but how richly that information is woven together into one inseparable whole. The more interconnected the system, the richer the experience of consciousness. According to IIT, even a simple system might possess a tiny glimmer of awareness if its parts are sufficiently integrated, while more complex systems like the human brain give rise to the deep, vivid, multifaceted experience of human consciousness. Some proponents of IIT have even speculated that, in theory, consciousness could exist in any sufficiently integrated system, raising strange questions about whether certain artificial systems or even networks might one day exhibit genuine awareness. And yet, despite these promising theories, we still face a kind of shimmering boundary, like looking at the surface of a lake, seeing the ripples but not the depth below. We can observe the neural correlates of consciousness, the brain regions and networks active during awareness, but explaining how those patterns give rise to experience remains elusive. The brain's language is electricity and chemistry, but somehow, out of these charged particles emerges the taste of chocolate, the ache of longing, the awe of a starry sky. No mathematical equation yet bridges the gap between these two realms. To add to the complexity, consciousness seems to exist along a spectrum. It's not simply on or off, like a light switch. Rather, it ebbs and flows like a dimmer dial, waxing and waning across different states. Consider sleep. Each night, as your head sinks into the pillow and your breath deepens, consciousness gradually recedes. During non-REM sleep, awareness thins, thought dissolves into scattered fragments, and then, as you enter REM sleep, something curious happens. Vivid dreams bloom into being. You're immersed in imaginary worlds that feel strangely real, running, flying, speaking, sometimes even knowing that you are dreaming. Dreams are, in a sense, self-generated virtual realities, offering a glimpse into how consciousness can persist in altered forms even as external sensory input fades away. Other altered states reveal the flexibility of awareness even further. Under general anesthesia, for example, consciousness can disappear entirely as though the flame has been temporarily snuffed. In contrast, practices like meditation can heighten certain aspects of awareness, allowing individuals to observe their thoughts and sensations with unusual clarity, or even experience moments of stillness where the boundary between self and world seems to soften. Psychedelic substances too can profoundly reshape consciousness, altering perception, emotion, and self-awareness in ways that both puzzle and fascinate neuroscientists. Recent research suggests that psychedelics disrupt certain brain networks, particularly the default mode network, loosening the rigid patterns of ordinary thought and allowing new, often bizarre connections to form. In these altered states, consciousness reveals itself not as a fixed thing, but as a fluid, adaptable process, one that can stretch, melt, or shimmer into unfamiliar shapes. Yet even in its ordinary everyday form, consciousness is astonishing in its complexity. Right now, as you lie listening to these words, your brain is weaving together countless threads of information. The weight of the blanket on your skin, the softness of your breath rising and falling, the gentle hum of ambient sounds around you, the steady unfolding of my voice into your ears, the emotional tone of these words, the quiet awareness of being aware. All these pieces, sights, sounds, feelings, thoughts, are not experienced separately, but blended seamlessly into a unified now. This unity of experience, sometimes called binding, remains one of the great puzzles of consciousness research. How does the brain, with its billions of separate signals, integrate them all into one coherent moment of here I am? And yet, for all its mysteries, we rarely notice how astonishing consciousness is, precisely because we are always swimming in it. A fish does not ponder the water. A flame does not reflect on its own warmth. And yet here we are, quietly aware of awareness itself. And yet, even as we peer deeper into the machinery of the brain, the mystery of consciousness seems to shift like mist in the morning light, always just beyond full grasp. But science has not stopped chasing it. Instead, it continues to peel back layers, revealing strange clues about the nature of awareness hiding in plain sight. One such clue lies in the curious relationship between consciousness and attention. Attention is often compared to a spotlight, illuminating specific parts of your experience while leaving others in shadow. Even now, as you listen to these words, you're not consciously aware of the feeling of your toes, until, of course, I mention them. Suddenly your attention shifts, and there they are, your toes quietly existing all along, unnoticed but now pulled into the light. Attention allows consciousness to select, prioritize, and organize vast rivers of information streaming into the brain. Without it, we would be hopelessly overwhelmed by the flood of sensations, thoughts, and emotions swirling inside us. And yet, while attention seems essential for consciousness, they're not quite the same. You can attend to something unconsciously, like driving familiar roads while daydreaming, just as you can be aware of background sensations without deliberately focusing on them. How these two processes intertwine remains one of neuroscience's many delicate puzzles. memory offers another window into the machinery of awareness. Much of our conscious experience is not simply what happens now, but how we stitch together the threads of past, present, and future. You remember your childhood home, you anticipate tomorrow's plans, you reflect on last week's conversation. This narrative stitching creates the experience of continuity, what we call the self. But underneath it all, memory is a fragile living system. Memories are not perfect recordings stored in dusty mental archives. They are reconstructed each time we recall them, subtly reshaped by context, emotion, and expectation. Even working memory, the brain's short-term scratch pad, plays a crucial role in consciousness. Without it, we could not hold a phone number long enough to dial it, or carry the thread of a sentence to its end. Some scientists argue that working memory might serve as a kind of temporary global workspace, holding select information in the forefront of awareness for as long as it's needed before releasing it back into the sea of unconscious processes. Intriguingly, the brain also seems capable of generating consciousness even in the absence of external input. Sensory deprivation experiments reveal that, when cut off from external stimuli, consciousness doesn't simply shut down. Instead, the mind often fills the emptiness with internally generated images, memories, or hallucinations, almost as though awareness, deprived of the outside world, begins to paint its own canvas. Monks and meditators who sit for long hours in silence often report similar phenomena. The mind gradually turns inward, drifting through waves of thoughts, sensations, and altered states, sometimes culminating in moments where even the sense of self seems to dissolve. It suggests that consciousness is not simply a passive response to the outside world, but has its own intrinsic momentum, a self-sustaining current flowing even in stillness. And yet, there are moments where consciousness can break apart in astonishing ways. One of the most famous examples comes from split-brain patients, individuals who, due to severe epilepsy, have had the connection between their brain's two hemispheres surgically severed. With this bridge, called the corpus callosum, cut, the two halves of the brain can no longer easily communicate, and yet, remarkably, each hemisphere can continue functioning independently, processing information, and even generating separate streams of awareness. In experiments, one hemisphere may see an image and respond to it while the other remains entirely unaware. Sometimes the two hemispheres seem to hold conflicting opinions, one hand reaching for one object while the other hand corrects it. These strange cases suggest that what we think of as a single unified consciousness may, under certain circumstances, divide into separate semi-independent islands of awareness, revealing how delicately our sense of unity depends on neural integration. Other rare conditions highlight just how fragile and complex consciousness truly is. In blind sight, individuals who have lost part of their visual cortex report being blind in certain regions of their vision. And yet, when asked to guess whether a light is present or where an object might be, they perform far better than chance, as if some part of the brain still sees, even though the person is unaware of seeing. It suggests that some sensory processing can occur beneath the surface of consciousness, feeding into unconscious systems while bypassing the spotlight of awareness entirely. There are even stranger disorders that challenge our understanding further. Consider alien hand syndrome, where patients experience their own hand acting seemingly on its own, grasping objects or performing actions without conscious intent. Or Cotard's delusion, where individuals become convinced that they do not exist or that they are dead, despite being fully awake and otherwise functional. In locked-in syndrome, patients remain fully conscious, but entirely paralyzed, able only to blink or move their eyes, trapped inside their own minds while fully aware of the world passing by. Each of these rare conditions reminds us that consciousness is not a single thing, but a delicate orchestration of perception, control, self-awareness, and memory, all of which can fracture in unexpected ways. Even more mysterious are the borderlands of life and death themselves. As medical technology advances, we've learned that some patients in vegetative or minimally conscious states may retain unexpected levels of awareness. In one famous study, a woman diagnosed as being in a vegetative state was asked inside an fMRI machine to imagine playing tennis or walking through her house. Remarkably, specific brain regions lit up in response to these commands, suggesting that, trapped within her unmoving body, some flicker of awareness remained, able to follow instructions despite outward unresponsiveness. It forces us to confront haunting questions. How much awareness may linger behind closed eyes? How easily might consciousness hide from even our most careful instruments? At the far edges of consciousness research lie questions that feel almost philosophical and yet demand scientific attention. Is consciousness something uniquely biological, tied forever to the chemistry of carbon-based life? Or could sufficiently complex artificial systems, machines, algorithms, digital networks, someday achieve their own forms of awareness? This debate straddles the boundary between neuroscience and artificial intelligence. Some argue that consciousness requires not just computation, but embodiment, a body that moves through the world, feels sensations, experiences emotions. Others believe that if the patterns of information processing are replicated closely enough, awareness might emerge even in silicon, perhaps in ways alien to human experience. Could a highly advanced AI one day sit quietly in a room, not only answering questions but knowing that it exists? Could it feel, suffer, dream? Or is there something about biological systems, a spark, a subtle property of living matter, that machines will never replicate? As our tools grow more precise, some researchers now attempt to measure the presence of consciousness directly. The Perturbational Complexity Index, PCI, for instance, attempts to quantify consciousness by measuring how much complex integrated activity occurs in the brain when stimulated. Using techniques like transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, scientists send brief pulses into the brain and observe how widely and unpredictably the signal spreads across neural networks. The more complex the pattern of activity, the greater the presumed level of consciousness. This approach has allowed scientists to estimate levels of awareness even in patients who cannot communicate, offering a faint but precious window into otherwise silent minds. And yet, for all these brilliant instruments and intricate models, consciousness remains curiously resistant to full capture. The hard problem lingers, like a quiet whisper behind every experiment. Why does any of this feel like anything? Why is there experience at all? Why aren't we simply unconscious machines, processing input without ever noticing? Some theorists suggest that we may be asking the wrong questions, that consciousness might be not a problem to solve, but a fundamental property of the universe itself. Just as space and time seem woven into the fabric of reality, perhaps awareness, however faint or rich, exists at many scales, emerging more fully as complexity grows. Others argue that consciousness may not exist as a thing at all, but only as a way we describe certain patterns of information processing, useful, poetic, but ultimately illusory. And so we find ourselves, once again, standing at the edge of a great mystery. The more we learn about neurons, circuits, and networks, the more we glimpse the astonishing intricacy of the brain. And yet, the flame of subjective experience, the gentle glow of being, remains just out of reach, softly humming beneath every scientific explanation. Consciousness, for all its intimacy, is not a singular, simple thing. Rather, it is a layered phenomenon built upon many mechanisms working in concert. Each layer adds its own piece to the quiet symphony of awareness. The deeper science peers, the more these layers unfold into intricate patterns. At its most basic level, consciousness arises from the brain's astonishing electrical ballet. Neurons fire in rapid bursts, releasing tiny messengers that cross delicate gaps, binding thought to thought like beads on an invisible string. These electrical signals are measured in milliseconds, yet from them emerge the rich colors of experience, the textures of emotion, and the gentle unfolding of the self. Scientists often begin their investigation of consciousness by looking at specific brain regions. The thalamus serves as a central relay station, passing information from the senses to the cortex. Without it, much of the sensory world would never reach awareness. The cortex itself, particularly the prefrontal and parietal lobes, handles the heavy lifting of attention, decision-making, and self-reflection. In this complex machinery, certain neural networks play key roles in shaping the contents of consciousness. The default mode network, DMN for instance, is most active when the mind is at rest, wandering through memories, planning, daydreaming. This network stitches together our internal narrative, the sense of I that drifts through past and future. During focused tasks, the central executive network takes the lead, managing attention, working memory, and goal-directed behavior. Meanwhile, the salience network monitors the internal and external environment for anything that demands attention, nudging focus toward important stimuli like a sudden sound or a flash of light. Rather than operating in isolation, these networks dance together, constantly shifting dominance depending on the situation. The delicate balance between them creates the flowing stream of conscious experience. Beyond these broad regions, scientists have uncovered subtler structures that seem intimately involved with the construction of awareness. One such structure is the claustrum, a thin sheet of neurons nestled deep within the brain, connecting many distant regions. Some researchers, including Francis Crick, have speculated that the claustrum might serve as a kind of conductor, synchronizing disparate brain activities into a unified conscious experience. This is not to say the claustrum alone holds the key. No single structure appears solely responsible. Instead, consciousness seems to emerge from patterns of integration, a harmony of signals flowing across many brain regions simultaneously. Like an orchestra, each section contributes its own notes, yet the music only becomes whole when played together. The brain's capacity to create this seamless experience becomes even more remarkable when examined through the lens of binding, the problem of how disparate pieces of information come together into a unified whole. Right now, as you listen, your brain processes the rhythm of these words, the pitch of my voice, the meaning of the sentences, the emotional tone, and your own thoughts about what you are hearing. Despite originating from different sensory and cognitive streams, all these elements arrive together as one moment of awareness. Theories propose that synchronized neural oscillations, brain waves pulsing in rhythm, may help coordinate this binding. Neurons firing in sync across different regions create windows where information can be exchanged more efficiently, allowing the brain to weave together sight, sound, thought, and emotion into a singular experience. Exploring these mechanisms reveals how fragile and intricate consciousness truly is. Disruptions to these networks can result in profound changes to awareness. In cases of neglect syndrome, patients with damage to the right parietal lobe may lose awareness of the left side of their visual field. They can eat only one side of a plate, shave half of their face, or fail to notice an entire side of a room, not because their eyes fail, but because the brain fails to represent part of space within conscious awareness. Similarly, anesthesia provides a temporary window into how consciousness can vanish. Under anesthesia, the global communication between brain regions diminishes. Information processing continues at a local level, but integration breaks down and awareness fades. This suggests that consciousness may depend not just on activity, but on the connectivity between regions, on the brain's ability to broadcast and unify information. The spectrum of consciousness becomes even more vivid when examined through various altered states. Dreams, meditation, hypnosis, psychedelics. Each reveals unique aspects of how awareness can shift, stretch, and warp. Dreams offer a nightly playground where consciousness operates in a world detached from external input.